What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. I'm Scott, here with Michael and Drew. As always, this is the Elder Scrolls podcast, and today we are talking all about the Daedric Prince Malacath, the god of the Orcs, I guess, and outcasts. And which one of you guys would like to take it away?
Daedric Prince of the Bloody Oath, the god of curses, the Poopy Prince. He's had a bit of a rough go, our mate. Because he used to be Trinimac, he was the paragon. He was the warrior god of the Oldma. It's all about strength, honor, and unity. But then Boethiah came along, and we'll get more into this for sure, consumed him, spoke with his voice, and then pooped him out right there in front of all of the elves. And that pretty much set the tone for Malacath's story.
Yeah.
So he didn't so he didn't begin as a typical Daedric prince. He has an Aedric origin. But that is if you believe all of the stories. Like there are some even orcs that believe that they are separate entities and they're completely different. But Malacath himself talks about the whole poop story as a little too literal minded, but I don't know. I feel like I'd tell people that too if I was literally eaten and shat out and became a new god.
Well, apparently his followers rubbed the excrement all over themselves to change them.
Yeah. Well, and
who knows?
I guess we should. We've probably talked about this before in the Orcs episode, but we should establish that Trinimac's followers were elves. Like Trinimac was an elven god, and when he was eaten and corrupted and shat out, yada yada, his followers became the orcs themselves, and they became the pariah folk.
So they are a corrupted elf in the same way.
And intrinsically connected with Malacath. Like he's really important to Orcish culture, and he dominates it. But
and interestingly, in Orcish culture, how the concept of Maluk, I think, is how they say it. Some people aren't really sure whether or not that's an Aedra or a Daedra. Like not Malacath specifically, but Maluk is kind of like a kind of in between, or some people see him as Aedric, some as Daedric. And to me, it just makes me think of how orcs in general, they're kind of the outcast. They're not elves anymore, but they're not men. They've just been designated into this corrupted state where they're not, always recognized.
It is interesting too how he does kind of encapsulate a lot of worship from all variety of outcasts, though, not just orcs. So, he takes sort of ownership over ogres and goblins. Like Malacath, you'll hear like all kinds of different names. There's Morlock and Malok and Maluk and Malak. And Mulak, the blue god, is I think the goblins one. They all have these different sort of names for what is believed to be, generally this similar figure. But even the Reachmen have some worship of Malacath, like sort of the outcast elements. And so on, but it's interesting. He just likes the ones that are down bad.
It's one of those things where obviously back in those early days, it was all about the kind of grand narrative or using metaphors to get across a point of what happened to different groups. But yeah, like the story of Boethiah consuming Trinimac is a really interesting one. It gives Malacath and the Orsma a really good story. But then, things like the potential relationship between, ogres and goblins and orcs, it kind of makes it a little more unusual that they almost certainly wouldn't have physically rubbed excrement over their skin. That almost seems like it's a perfect way to kind of discredit or make a different race look like they're beneath you. If you just say, oh yeah, they're all these, they're corrupted in filth compared to us pure whatever elves or dark elves or high elves or everyone else. So it is interesting to think how much of it is literal, and even if as Malacath says, it's not as literal as the stories say. At this point, does it matter? The story has completely changed everyone's perception of you and your people.
Myth makes reality.
Exactly.
So if enough people believe he was excreted, it's true.
But that is one interesting thing about him, is that there's, Trinimac is the paragon, and the virtues that are associated with him are strength, honor, and unity, which even though Malacath is now corrupted, he still does embody those principles, but it seems to be mixed in with a bit more bitterness now, and it's kind of just devoted to the people who stayed true to him. So if you weren't loyal to Malacath, he probably won't show honor towards you or doesn't care about keeping unity. It's more about his folk after everything that happened.
It's actually true too. He seems to like relish a little bit more in the sort of the individual pride and honor and sort of like when I mean the individual, like if we're looking at how you've got Trinamac and Malacath. So Trinamac, typically it's believed that Trinamac became Malacath, but the ones who still worship Trinamac and insist that he's a separate being, and there's kind of this kind of idea of like a higher Trinamac that's separate and not like Malacath, this cursed prince, usually comes around when the Orcs try and build civilization. So generally around Orsinium. It's happened multiple times. Whereas Malacath seems like, and all of his Malacath's laws and like how to live your life make the most sense in a sort of like tribal structure that I guess doesn't really have a lot of opportunity for growth. There's a lot more like focus, I guess, on principles, kind of like, you know how they have with like the blood price and the sort of oaths, and they'll have what's one of the titles? Yeah, Daedric Prince of the Bloody Oath. But it seems very like, I guess you could even use the word like conviction as part of like Malacath's sphere. I mean, specifically to his kind of thing, but it's something he seems to value, and the people who follow him seem to value, because whereas other orcs will compromise their convictions or so on to build like bigger society, because obviously the same, like, you know, the hyper patriarchal sort of the polyamorous sort of lifestyle doesn't really work on a big scale. It's not really conducive to have your sons fight against you for the top spot, because you're not really going to be able to preserve a ongoing civilization like that. And that's why you could argue that Orsinium generally starts shifting towards these other ideas, more cosmopolitan ideas, and, you know, things like Trinamac, worship of Trinamac as some sort of, you know, elven civilization kind of god. Do you know what I'm sort of saying?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of parallels when you look at the way orcs build up their society. That it's like, you know, Malacath would have trouble trusting other gods and other Daedric princes, and it's kind of a case with the tribal orcs that it's all about isolating yourselves from the dangers and you know, being able to protect yourselves, because if you try to coexist with other groups, it always seems to end badly for them, and it's almost like Trinamac's followers, so now that he's Malacath, are kind of doomed to always face his fate when they try to kind of become more than just defensive.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of like you have to be in the in-group. You have to be an outcast. You have to be isolated from society. I mean, even the orcs that leave strongholds to go and live in the city are kind of looked down upon by stronghold orcs. Like the city orc is like a weak orc, to them at least. You know, like he doesn't respect that, and he wants the orcs to, you know, stay with their culture and stay strong. And I mean, we even see in the Skyrim quest how the chief Yamaz becomes weak, and, you know, giants will literally attack because they're not viewed as a formidable force, the orcs, that is. Yeah. And so you go and help, obviously, Yamaz with the giant, and he is a weakling, and he tries to betray you, and so on and so forth. But you can see how kind of that orcish culture of needing to be strong, needing to be an outcast, like you were saying, Scott, it's not really conducive to building a civilization or any kind of change. It's static. And repetitive, and preserving, this is the way, don't change it. And, you know, even in, I think it's Oblivion, like you need a really low personality or an orc to speak to Malacath. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure like you're considered like too beautiful almost to speak to him.
I'm not sure if that might be Namira's the beauty thing. Personality, I think, might be Namira, but maybe there is. It does sound familiar. If you're an orc, I think you can kind of skip.
I think there's something if you're an orc. Yeah,
you can. Yeah.
Well, that is one thing about him, is that it really does seem that bitterness does drive him a lot, because, you know, he's obviously considered to be the patron of the ostracized, but it really doesn't seem to be ostracized people in general. It's more orcs.
Yeah, it's his people.
And goblins and ogres. Exactly, because, you know, if you think about it, like, obviously, other than the orcs, he's not going to favor any elves, because they either didn't follow him or they actively betrayed him. And when it comes to humans, when he was Trinamac, he would lead the armies of the elves against Lorkhan's armies of men. Yeah. So he's got no love for men either. So pretty much just leaves the orcs.
Yeah, and
It's interesting.
Sorry, I was going to say Namira likes all the outcasts, like all kind of outcasts. And I just wanted to re-clarify, I did bring up the Oblivion quest here, and it does say the beautiful thing. One of the orcs at the shrine will mention that the followers don't like beautiful people, and suggests that maybe you can convince Malacath that you're not so beautiful, or him, that you're not so beautiful on the inside. So if you have more disposition, he tells you they don't like non-orcs, and that you should approach the shrine at your own risk. If you're an orc, the Malacath worshippers will be welcoming, and you won't need any disposition boosts. But either way, you need the troll fat to activate the shrine. But if you're not an orc, Malacath will treat you worse. Like the first thing he says is, "Oh, good, nice present from a nice orc too. Double good. Orcs are smart. Blah blah blah." He actually says, you want something, you do what the boss tells you. So it's kind of like, he does boss them around. They are kind of his children in a way. But if you're not an orc, it's just, oh, that's good. You want something, if you're smart, you'll do what I tell you. Like, he doesn't treat you the same.
Even his presentation in a lot of the mythologies, he is really closely connected to the orcs. So, in the songs of Wulfarth, he's seen as like fighting alongside the orcs, sort of like as a king figure. You've got him obviously like post, with Trinimac and his followers turning into him and the orcs. That like close connection is there. But there's various mythologies around the place that recognize orcs, like, Morrowind, the Dunmer and the House of Troubles. Like, he's sort of got this position who sends the orcs to test them for physical strength and to keep them, you know what I mean? Like, but unlike
also
a lot
in the
of
Accords of Madness as well, with Sheogorath tricking him into killing an orc, and you can really see his remorse when he figures out it's one of his children.
Well, it literally is, isn't it? Like, it could be figurative, but I assumed it's literally his son. It's like his...
I assumed it was just a son, as in an orc.
No,
well,
it's
a
a
demi-prince called Emeg Keira.
Oh,
So,
okay,
I mean,
missed
just
that.
to provide background on that story, so there's this renowned orcish warrior, Emeg, and Sheogorath basically gives him this sword known as the Neb Crescent. Not crescent, but spelt the same without the T. And it's like a sword of bloodlust. Like, you hold it and it just makes you want to kill everything. And so, giving Emeg this sword, he murders a young orc girl in this frenzied haze and just runs away. Then Sheogorath brings Malacath to the scene of the crime and says, look at this orc girl, because Malacath likes orcs. Like, she was murdered and slaughtered. Like, I want you to exact vengeance. And he convinces Malacath to exact vengeance, but says, you must do so with this sword. And so he gives Malacath a Neb Crescent, and then Malacath, it says, manifested in the direction the killer was fleeing and drew the blade, and which further fueled his rage. And then he just lops off his head. And then he realizes that it's his biological son that he has damned to the realm of the mad god, Sheogorath. But then you got to feel sorry for Malacath. Sheogorath comes to the scene to claim the still sentient head of Emeg and the Neb Crescent. Malacath stayed behind and mourned as he heard the pleas of his son being carried off into the distance. That's just heartbreaking. See, but I like it because it shows... I mean, we always know Sheogorath's crazy, but it really shows him in more of a dirty light. Like, he is just... He's not like a haha cheese. Like, he can be like very, very cruel just for the sake of being very cruel. What are you laughing at?
Just the way you said, jeez.
Yeah. Like,
So I did completely cut you off before, Scott. I apologize. You were going somewhere else when I brought up the 16 Accords. I don't know if you remember.
We're gonna have to walk back a little bit, go into the grey matter of my brain.
You were just talking about how... Oh, I can't even remember.
I thought he was just going to say
there
the
are
story
texts.
I talked about.
Yeah, there are texts that link.
No, it was just a broader thing. I guess it's just to do with the connection of him being a king. It's more like a direct role. And actually, here we go. This reminds me of somewhere I was going. But I wonder what kind of potential advantages there are. Because if you look at most... For example, Aedra, for starters, are like, sort of somewhat unconscious or not really present in the world. And then most of the Daedric princes don't sort of seem to have a strong cultural attachment to any one particular prince. Like, the closest I can kind of get is somewhat you've got Azura and the Khajiit, or even Azura and the Dunmer. But, like, to be honest, the good Daedra for most of Dunmer history have just been made the anticipations, and the tribunal sort of took over, and you can imagine a lot of the good Daedra, didn't look favorably upon that, and then that's why the Nerevarine prophecy was made. Like, she was sort of angry at them. But there's not really any Daedric princes aside from Malacath that champion like one race's cause over the others, because it sort of seems like most of the championing mortals seems to be like an Aedra thing, like the elves and their elven gods, or like Shore and the Nords and that kind of thing, whereas most of the Daedra I've seen is like, I have my own interests in the realms of oblivion and all that, and it's probably because he started off as Trinimac and hence sort of has like an Aedric origin and became Malacath. But it's just I don't think there is any advantage necessarily because of the structure of his codes and all that. But
I suppose I guess it's not just one particular race, but I mean there are different Daedra that have, you could say, favorites only because the race worships them. I mean, look at the Dark Elves and the 3 good Daedra there. But they are found in other. Yeah, they are found in other.
Well, that is an interesting thing about having Daedra who originated as Aedra, because obviously we know that the Aedra invested so much, not just of their power, but emotionally in creating Mundus. And you could say the same for Meridia. She's got a unique dynamic when it comes to the mortal realm because of her story. But with Malacath, it's actually one I was thinking for a while about. There's the unusual connection between Malacath and the Dwemer, and it's really like figuring out whether it's just a nickname like Jumac Dwarf King, Jumac Dwarf Orc, Ju Malacath are titles for him. And it would almost make sense if you've got Malacath with his grudges against certain races. But the Dwemer, we don't really know when they came to the mainland, and they might not have been involved on Somerset when Trinimac had his great shame.
Could have been. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to... it's also the fact that the Dwemer are actively in conflict with the Kai'Ma, who Malacath's not going to like, as well as the Nords. So the idea that Malacath would favour the Dwemer as well as his orcs makes a lot of sense, as well as the fact that you've got Volendrung that obviously comes as a result of...
If you want to stretch it a little further too, like you could also say that the dwarves are somewhat of an outcast race in terms of like philosophy, like kind of being anti-god, as in like not recognizing them as gods and sort of bringing that, they're not atheist as but you know what I mean, they're very not, they don't acknowledge the gods, just as greater beings and so on, and that's a very different... I don't know how that helps. I don't know how that helps Malacath or anything in particular, but it does sort of put them as a sort of outcast position. But it is interesting. There's lots of like, because I was considering making a video, and I've gone to look at it a few times, and I'm just like, there's lots of like happenstance sort of fun connections, like the Volendrung or like the Malacath or the Dumac Dwarf Orc and stuff like that. But I'm like, there's nothing substantial enough. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's too much to show that the Dwemer are separate. Like, they're not the same. Like, you see Dwemer ghosts. We see a live Dwemer, Jaeger and Bagan. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's not enough to kind of...
And in a way, the fact that the Dwemer were, in a sense, a test for the Kai'Ma, and, the Orcs are considered a physical test on the Kai'Ma. The Dwemer warring with them could even be considered a test, so maybe, a nickname for Jumac would be given there. Maybe he's just big, he's just a really strong a really strong dwarf, so they call him Dwarf Orc. There's a million potential reasons, but no really substantiated ones.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to do it. But maybe one day, but I think we need a little more info. And also consider that a lot of like the Malacath one, for example, is from the Songs of Wulfarth, which is from Nordic culture, which they have their sort of colored opinions about different races, and they're also they're quite like poetic and so on. Like Malacath could be like he's similar to orcs and kind of thing, like give him that name because of they might just lump them all in as one enemy. I don't know, but kind of getting at like
they're just antagonists to the Nords.
Yeah, and also like I feel like Vivek, Almalexia, and Sotha Sil would know if orcs and Dwemer were the same thing, and like, do you know what I mean? This would be acknowledged. So yeah, it's just odd to kind of string them together, but it's interesting.
It is interesting as well how in his code, I don't know if this is just like a projection of what happened to him, but it's very like anti-betrayal. Like if you look at Orcish society, it's very honest, or it's supposed to be. Like it's very simple, it's straightforward. It's like, because there's the story of like Boethia betraying him in different ways or sneaking up on him and doing this. But, you know, if you look at the code of Malok, it's like, you know, no stealing, no murder, no assault, do forge and blacksmithing, and there's vengeance is required for insulted honor. You know, it's kind of like...
and the classic, like, and the blood price.
The blood price.
As well.
That sounds scary, man. I wouldn't want to do that because it's,
in a way,
it's based on the victim. The victim decides when they're satisfied with how much blood is spilled. And you can imagine someone who's angry could just be overly spiteful and like just let someone bleed out hardcore.
But you see how they like find... they find like honor seems to be a big thing, even in the sense that like they even, you know, honor people by not, you know, they wouldn't like degrade them by making them prisoners and feeding them. It's like, no, you're a, you know, pay the blood price and do what you owe. You have to, you know, you owe someone this. But it's not like the sort of degrading kind of aspect. So I'm not going to put you in prison. In a prison.
And it doesn't take away your freedom in a sense.
So
even though something bad's going to happen. But
so it's kind of like fair in that sort of sense. It doesn't. And you know, they see a lot of honor in combat and stuff like that, and strength. So it's not like a kumbaya fair sort of scenario. If you know.
I mean, it's a very might is right society. They settle their disputes with violent fights, but I suppose they're upfront about it. They don't settle it by coming and killing you in the night.
Yeah, but this is ultimately. I mean, I talked about this a lot in the Mephala video, and like basically why she's almost like a god of civilization. But like to actually succeed in, you know, the long term, to build a civilization, like a big empire or something, you need to do lots of underhanded shit. You need to do bad things, you know, whether it's like, you know, political maneuvering or assassination and all these kinds of things. Like everything we live on now is built on what a lot of people in the past had to do, which was a lot of bad shit, you know. So it's kind of like all of that very strict convicted sort of honor-bound lifestyle doesn't really help them build a big civilization. It's why they end up in a lot of these like tribal sort of strongholds and so on, because, you know, might makes right is not.
I mean, it's not efficient.
You know.
It's just not efficient. Imagine if you have two strong orcs, like they're really, really strong. They're stronger than, I don't know, better fighters than like the next 10,000 Imperial dudes. But if they're in the same tribe, like say it's father and son, one of them's gonna die because one of them has to be chief. So it's a massive waste of a perfectly capable fighter who could otherwise have been used but didn't get to live because he wasn't as strong as just someone else in his tribe.
But in the same way too, we should consider too, is that it is a sort of altruistic's like the wrong word, but they do have an interest in the tribe as a whole. Like the reason that they insist that the chief has to be tested and has to be strong, and they only earn it, and his son has to earn his place, is because they maintain a strong tribe.
Yeah,
so that
it's kind of like, you know, I don't know if eugenics is the right word, but
yeah,
kind of like that. It's just like planned, only spreading the best, most powerful genes of, but you know, based on combat purely.
Even so, how like their old orcs go out to die when they feel they're no longer useful to the tribe, and in fact that they'd be a burden on the tribe. They're like, no, I'm going to go and earn a good death.
Yeah,
or something.
When I talk about them wasting a good warrior, I only mean from a purely utilitarian kind of perspective.
Yeah.
Like what has the most use.
That's another consideration as a society. Without employing some sort of effective, efficient, utilitarian sort of things, they're not going to get far, because they're still stuck with convictions of you know, honor and how things are supposed to go in their culture. But then that's why also Asinium, like when it's around, like a lot of the Elder Scrolls Online storyline has to do with like underhandedness and you know, some of the methods that King Kurog was implementing, like they weren't good, and that's why it falls apart soon after.
Yeah, I mean another big reason, and I've talked about this before, I think in Why the Orcs Always Lose video, but basically it's like the orcs spread all over Tamriel, Like, yeah, there was Orsinium, but they spread everywhere. Instead of, we're the Dark Elves, or the Chimera, I should say, and we're going to Morrowind, or we're the Aelids, and we're in Cyrodiil. We're everywhere. We're in all kinds of different provinces. And when you spread that far, obviously you have cultural divergence. And when you have cultural divergence, you have all these different beliefs competing with one another when you bring all the orcs together. So you're like, here's Orsinium, a bunch of orcs all come from different places. Like, no, this is the way the code should be followed. No, this is how it should be done. We should worship Trinimac or Malacath and so on.
In a fun way too, like just to throw some like blame around, but like it was kind of the Regatta's fault and the Yakutans that came in a big way, because heaps of orcs lived in Hammerfell, because Hammerfell was largely like unclaimed land.
And they would have lived in peace with goblins, right? Like a lot of goblin Ken type thing, ogres and goblins.
Because remember, the founding of Orsinium in the first place was caused by the Yakutans coming, wiping out the heaps of Hammerfell.
The Yakutans just killed everyone.
And then the orcs had to flee, and a lot of the places they went was High Rock, and then they started gathering around and they made the first Orsinium. And that's kind of why that they were there. But true, they were also around everywhere else, like Skyrim and Morrowind. And I wonder if there probably would have been some in Cyrodiil at some points.
It's hard to say, because there's such small clans. And
there's Valenwood, the Wood Orcs as well.
They don't seem like very... there's the Iron Orcs too, right?
Yeah, in Hammerfell.
Yeah. So it's not like they really feel like a strong history-based group who would be writing down everything and scribing everything that happens.
But at the same time, I feel like because they're in such close connection with Malacath and they have such a tight connection with that god and they can kind of hear his words, I feel like he can guide all of those different tribes to a sort of similar thing. Like, because, it's a pretty straightforward, simple society. Like, there's not a lot of complexity to it. They are functionally just
But he hasn't really been guiding them in the best way. If you think about it, like, the orcs' life is... I mean, you could say it makes them stronger, but you could say that about, any people who aren't doing well. But they're not doing well anywhere. The goblins aren't doing well. Like, the goblins are a race that constantly gets enslaved and looked down on, and they're kicked out of society. I mean, they can't really function. They don't seem to have the same level of sentience, or I don't know what the right word is, but the same intelligence.
At the end of the day, it just doesn't help that they're so hated, because it wouldn't be terribly difficult for them to come together and agree on things and unify, not just in their small settlements, but unify together. But then the few times they try that, because of other circumstances, but also because no one particularly likes them, they just get rooted out anyway, and then they have to start from scratch.
If you pull it, also one thing to consider with Malacath and like having bitterness as part of his sort of personality, and him sort of reveling in his role as an outcast or king of outcasts, even you could sort of say too that like, it's not his goal to create an orcish super state of Orsini or something like that. That he prefers them live as his codes sort of dictate, like live like those tribes, because to live, as this outcasted tribe of orcs is kind of what he wants. So it's sort of like they are the mortal orcs are to forever, his followers are to forever sort of relive the outcast.
To prosper would make him obsolete. Potentially.
It's like the parent unhealthily trying to live vicariously through their child. They're like, no, I'm the outcast god. You have to stay. You should be an outcast too, to experience what I experienced. Because he doesn't like the beautiful people. Imagine if orcs became somehow the most prosperous race, and but kind of like they'd have to give up that code. Just imagine everyone loves orcs, but orcs take on cosmopolitan values. You know what I mean? Like, imagine they're just super respected and loved for whatever reason. They're walking around the Imperial City. Everyone loves orcs. Malacath wouldn't like that.
Which I think is the root of the people in Orsinium pushing to neglect Malacath and embrace Trinimac again, is because Trinimac and Malacath, as I've said before, are very similar. It's just one has all the corruption and the corruption and the bitterness and all of that, whereas Trinimac could easily be their patron in a unified, prosperous city. But then, some people are so staunchly devoted to Malacath because he's been with them through all the tough times that, you know, they kind of will have essentially wallow together. They, you know, one won't move on without the other.
One thing that I find interesting about Malacath is actually, I'm pretty sure somewhere he presents himself as a female, like with green eyes or something. I know it's Greg in the Greg Keyes novel. So it's Atrebus and Sul were thrown through various realms of oblivion, and Atrebus was badly wounded when going through Namira's realm. He ended up in a grey void filled with ash, and dying, saw various visions, including one of a doll of himself being stitched up, at which point he started breathing again. He awakened to find himself in a grey box with his wound healed. He was approached by an avatar of Malacath, who questioned him to find out his intentions, and then the Daedric prince revealed himself. Is it? Hold on. There's this.
Revealed
Here we go.
himself?
So, yeah, but there is this one section. Atrebus's wounds were tended to by an Altmer woman with pale skin, rosy gold hair, and green eyes, named Sihanza, who soon revealed herself to be Malacath in disguise. Malacath agreed to help the pair after hearing their story, as Sul's motivation was revenge, which delighted the prince.
Maybe this is one of his...
Slaughter of Souls.
Was like an awesomer follower before they became corrupted.
It's just
became
interesting.
Orcs. Yeah.
I know there are some things in like the Greg Keyes novels that are kind of out there compared to other Elder Scrolls interpretations, but nevertheless, they're pretty interesting. I actually really want to make some videos where I will make like summaries of the books for people as videos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll take a long time, but like I think it'd be cool.
They're not huge books.
They're not, but I think
Yeah.
imagine you read a chapter, then you have to summarize it, then read a chapter, summarize it, and then, you know.
The in that, you know, I mentioned before, and people should check it out if they're interested in it. But how the video that I wrote a while ago called "Complexities of Mephala," and it talks about how Mephala is essentially a sort of is like a kind of a god of civilization, or necessary for it, and so on. So you can go check that out for the main point. But in it, I brought up that Malacath. Do you know how there's, and this could be seen as outdated sort of Daggerfall lore, potentially, but you know how they have different lists of like, different Daedric princes they're allied with and so on. And one of Malacath's only allies is Mephala, and vice versa. And I was sort of bringing up this idea that perhaps it's kind of like a mutual benefit. Like, I mean, Malacath could be arguably created by Mephala's treachery if she played a role with Boethia in defeating Trinamac and it coming out. But that sort of that the orcs, that Mephala herself and all her ways help for the creation of sort of civilization, but Malacath's kind of role as creating these outcasts of civilization also provide that kind of like those raiders, that troublesome kind of stuff, which, you know, Malacath likes because he's like, oh, they're outcasts. That's how he likes his orcs. And then they're getting stronger fighting against, and, you know, doing what they do in combat and, what do you call it? Like, not victory, the wrong word. I'm thinking of military accomplishments. They take pride in it. So they're like, yeah, that's a battle worth fighting. But then fighting against civilizations, which were, you know, arguably created by Mephala, more so in the Morrowinds, the House of the Dunmer and so on. But what I'm saying is that one sustains the other, having the outcast and an enemy for civilization to fight. And then together they're both benefiting.
It's convenient to help teach the Kaima people the Sigil Endeavor, to teach them to overcome. It's like, if you've got the perfect example of what you're trying to overcome, and you've got a face you can put to it and a name you can put to it, you can see the goal, you can visualize it, and you can achieve it. So it's almost like it's tactical to create an enemy out of Malacath for the changed ones to personify their physical test.
Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, I did put it far more eloquently in the video, so you should probably check it out in the video. But yeah,
I was going to say, it's interesting. Apparently, Azura considers him quite powerful from Elder Scrolls Online dialogue. And you know the Cold Harbor Compact, there was 8 Daedric princes that signed that, and Malacath was one of them. Azura, Boethia, Hermaeus Mora, Hircine, Malacath, Mehrunes Dagon, Molag Bal, and Sher Gorath. Created in response to the destruction of Gilverdale by Molag Bal.
Yeah.
to stop Daedric princes manifesting on Nirn. It's interesting that Malacath was chosen. I don't know if it's just because he has reference in like Dark Elf religion and stuff, or if it's just because he was one of the only ones who would sign it and the other ones didn't want to.
Malacath could be far more powerful than people credit for, but his convictions and beliefs about how to live life and his sort of bitterness kind of limit him somewhat in terms of like, because people, the general assumption is that if it's like, oh, if the Daedric prince is powerful, then why don't they take over everything? But it's like generally they have sort of beliefs or things, or like they have some sort of sphere.
It's like Nocturnal. Nocturnal is considered like one of the most powerful Daedric princes, but she's not always, at least, trying to take over the world.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, all the Daedric princes kind of just feel like forces that help to balance everything. You know, even obviously you have instances where that goes wrong, but I mean, like looking at Orca, which is how the Khajiit perceive Malacath, and it's very similar to the way the Dunmer do, and it says in the adversarial spirits, it's like Orca spoke in curses of affliction and knew no other words, and his entire purpose was to test them along the path up to the heavens and to help them kind of stray from it, which is the case for a fair few princes to the Khajiit. So, you know, he is kind of serving his purpose, even if it's a negative one, to anyone but the Orcs.
Yeah. I mean, we should also say, I mean, we could talk a bit about the Blue God, the goblins. They kind of refer to him as this Blue God. And it's Maluk.
Yeah,
this is new, isn't it?
There's
fairly new.
I'm pretty sure it's been around, but I know in Elder Scrolls Blades there's a little statue to like this Maluk, and it's a it's basically blue. Malacath painted blue.
The thing I don't like is that I'm sick of people referring to Creation Club as canon, but in Skyrim Creation Club they got a goblins creation. And in that, there's a storyline where there's goblins and they're in 4th era Skyrim and they're worshipping this blue god. But then you uncover that the blue god is just an orc who's painted himself with like a blue mushroom fungus paint or something like that, and he's a fake. Yeah. So it's a bit,
but like goblins, it's funny because a lot of the Yakutan mythology and so on refers to it being goblins, and they use the word goblins for orcs. And apparently, like the goblins of Hammerfell at that time were much taller and larger, like, you know, taller than a man even, and so on. Which sounds, and that could be part of the reason, like in early history, like we've talked about this before, but why goblins and orcs might have been conflated. So when you know Trinmax's followers were turned into the orcs, that they might have been called goblins because they would have looked more similar to the goblins of the first era that were much taller and so on. And then later the goblins sort of devolve and become smaller.
Because there is the idea, which I know there's kind of contradictions when it comes to this, but it's hinted at in some sources. I can't remember the ones at the moment, but the Daedra generally, rather than creating something brand new from scratch, they kind of take elements of other things and kind of essentially copy. So it would make sense if Boethiah did actually corrupt Malacath and the orcs to look the way they do. It could have just been like, oh, you know, you are cursed to look like goblins, basically, because goblins were a beast race that predated this corruption, which would obviously lean into the ties between them.
Yeah.
I mean, even in-game, it's interesting, but it seems like sometimes... it's not always the case, but I swear there's in-game stuff about like ogres not attacking different orcs and stuff.
Yeah, well, like that's the thing too. A lot of the original stuff for Orsinium has orcs, goblins, ogres, and like that kind of what they call like goblin kin or whatever. So he kind of likes a bunch of them, and they've been seen together. And I feel like seeing an Orsinium would be so cool in Elder Scrolls 6. And if they set it in Hammerfell, they can do it because Orsinium is in that mountain range. And like having a place where you would just see like ogres and goblins and orcs all together. Like maybe you can only interact with the orcs, but you're just seeing like, you know, ogres moving stuff around and like...
I just have to check. I'm not 100% sure if it's true that they don't attack orc NPCs. I have a feeling it could have been the fact that the orc NPC was a vampire, and that they're like, oh, it's just another gross creature like type NPC, and we're on the same team. I don't know. I'm only speaking on Oblivion because I've just done a whole bunch of testing and things get very strange.
Well, we can start talking about some of the artifacts and also his realm, but I guess we'll just start with the realm because that's easiest. But it's the Ash Pit, which is a place of dust and smoke and anguish and betrayal. More things that sort of sound like bitterness. But in the center, there's this sort of ashen forge, which is his own stronghold in the center of the Ash Pit, and the orcs that live a life according to Malacath. That's what they're gonna end up dying, and they're like, yes, I get to go to.
It's like their sovereign guard.
Forge.
And they're all a chieftain, they all have 1,000 wives, and they all just fight and drink and party and do what orcs want forever.
I guess that kind of death would be a lot less scary for them, and also not being a chief in life or something, or not being able to have a wife in life if you weren't the chief. Seems a little bit better if, at least in heaven, when you do die, you do get to go to the Ashen Forge. And
it's like the quintessential stronghold for them, that instead of enemies outside their walls, it's just smoke that will kill you anyway. So stay inside your stronghold, stay unified inside your stronghold, and everyone gets to live the perfect chief or whatever lifestyle they want within it. So it sounds awful, but to them, it's probably quite nice.
Yeah. And I'm not even kidding, by the way, just so everyone knows that whole 1,000 wives and everyone's a chief thing, that's for real. And every wife has 1,000 slaves to cater for their every need.
Sounds exhausting.
Yeah. It is interesting actually to note, and I think again this is one of the novels, but there are some areas that are safe for mortals to go. Apparently Prince Atribus Mead and Saul were taken by Malacath, hold on. They found a garden of slender trees and, quote, vines festooned with lily-like flowers. Wound about the trunks, a multitude of spheres moved deep in the colourless sky, as distant and pale as moons. The garden seemed to have some emotional significance to Malacath, who describes it as a shadow of a garden and an echo of something that once was. Which is kind of interesting.
Did they need some kind of spell to let them breathe there? Or was it just said that they could go there?
I think it was an area where they could go. But generally speaking, you do need levitation and magical breathing. It's cool that they keep the in the mages. There's an item in the Elder Scrolls Online where they actually keep some of the ash pit like vapor in a little vial. It's just cool. Yeah. And that actually ties into one of the artifacts, the brutal bands. Which are like basically just heavy iron rings, and when you put them on, it's kind of like the Neb Crescent. It instinctively curls your hands into fists, and you can hear the sound of distant drums and crashing steel, and it fills you with bitterness. And obviously, you can imagine fighting with them; you'd be really powerful. But apparently, it's like a phone charger, like a wireless one. You put the brutal bands in dust in like this ash while you sleep, to charge it with energy from the ash pit.
It's a crazy kind of funny thing, because I hear all this bitterness and so on. I'm like, it just sounds so sad. And then it's also like, most orcs are incels. Like they literally, like, only the chief can go at. So they kind of, it's kind of like, I'd be bitter too.
Well, if like the thing is that afterlife is confirmed real in the Elder Scrolls universe, so they'll get the last laugh when they've got their 1,000 wives in the ash pit.
Yeah. But let's move on to the Daedric artifacts. The other one. Let's just talk about Volantrung real quick, which is like, it's not really his. He's claimed it, but it's like its origin was it's a Dwemer hammer created by the Dwarven the Rorken clan, which are the same ones that the legendary story where they throw the hammer and they're going to go to where it lands and settle where it lands, and that's why you get Volanfell and hence Hammerfell, the name. So that's the hammer, and it's had various effects. They're nothing crazy, right? It's like paralysis in. Was that in Oblivion? Paralysis?
Let me check.
I can't remember. I know it's just stamina drain.
Skyrim's one was the worst. Skyrim. It looked really cool, although I'm still on the fence about whether I prefer it looking like Dwarven or just Daedrified. But
Yeah.
in Oblivion, it was paralyzed for 3 seconds and drain health, 5 points for 20 seconds, which is total of 100 damage, which is pretty strong. But
He's also
I don't like Skyrim's effect, which it's absorbs stamina, so it's useful for doing more power attacks, but it's nothing you can't put on an enchanted weapon yourself.
I also he's also credited. He's the third credit to the Savior's Hide, having potentially in some stories it's accredited to him. And I'll prefer Hircine's story, but I do actually like that, and I hope in the future games he does get a bigger arsenal, because as the sort of like, you know, smithing kind of vibes of the orcs and so on, and he has the Ashen Forge, I hope he actually does have a bunch more weapons that are accredited to him and different armors, because it kind of just fits his... Do you know what I mean? It fits his sphere. So I kind of like that there's a bunch of different things.
You know, in Morrowind, Volendrung doesn't even have an enchantment. It's just a unique looking warhammer that's strong.
Yeah.
But to be fair, it's unrelated to his quest. You just find it in a chest in the Corprosarium bowels beneath Telfir, near Jaegrum Begarn's platform. Yeah. So... I don't know. You could almost imagine like when he gives it to you, because it's not inherently Daedric. If we believe that it's Dwarven. Imagine when Malacath gives it to you, he kind of enchants it then and there. So it's like the one in Morrowind. I'm just headcanoning some stuff. You can imagine it's just in a chest. There's no enchantment on it. It's just chilling.
There's also the Helm of Oren Bearclaw, which is credited to him, but that's only if you believe it was not the performance of Oren Bearclaw, but instead his orc friend Karag Grogar. Maybe. Don't know. Cool.
But just real quick, the Volendrung effect in Daggerfall was also paralysis and vampiric touch. So,
yeah. But Scourge, I think, is the one of the artifacts that's sort of most closely kind of like makes sense with his sphere, I guess. And also, it's cool to have an artifact that is just solely his. It wasn't claimed by anyone else,
and it does sound cool, like forged in the fires or fountains of Fickle Dire. It's.
Do we know anything about Fickle Dire?
No. Just sounds cool.
Just sounds cool, but like it just it just adds more mystery of like there's gonna be, or there could be more stuff about Malacath to learn. Like that the Ash Pit's not as straightforward as people may think.
It's cool that just Scourge sort of, you know, there's a little bit of like Daedric heritage there, and at least it like banishes Daedra. That being one of its sort of effects is kind of a cool like. Do you know what I mean? Like it could be a little bit of Trinimac into Malacath's personality, anti-Daedra, I guess. You know, but yeah. I don't know. Do you guys have anything else to add about Malacath? He who was birthed from an Anos.
He stinks.
Smelly boy. Because we've talked about the whole transformation story like so many times. I don't know what else there is to add. Like, we get it. There's poo involved. It's like there's I don't know what to tell the people.
Yeah, no idea. Did we talk about Savior's Hide?
Yeah, I just mentioned
it's just kind of throwaway thing.
To me, that's way cooler being Hircine's.
It makes more sense.
Him ripping his own skin off to give it to someone who escaped his realm is way more hardcore than Malacath making it.
Yeah. Plus, there's 2 out of the 3 stories are Hircine based, and it also just sounds right. Yeah. It just feels right. I can't see it relating to him in any way. Like, what's Malacath about it?
Yeah. Just like anything. I guess he could like vaguely connect himself to a bunch of things. Like if you smithed a bunch of things, you know what I mean? Like if he made the like nail or something.
Yeah, I guess so.
I suppose. But like, But yeah, all right. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Malacath, and this was the Elder Scrolls podcast with Scott, Michael, and Drew, and we'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.